Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas. Kathy grew up in a peaceful and happy family. During her childhood, she was very close to her older sister. When she was a teenager, Kathy met Mike Odom, whom she would later marry and start a family. After the wedding, the two settled in a quiet suburb outside of Houston, and soon after, they had a daughter and a son. After the birth of their second child, Kathy stayed home and took care of the children. Meanwhile, Mike worked at her father's small sign factory. Thanks to the financial support of Kathy's parents, the family was able to provide for their children. Therefore, Kathy was able to take care of the children without having to worry about working extra. On March 3, 1987, Kathy stayed home to take care of the children as usual. Mike went to work and then met up with friends at a bar after work. He called Kathy from a pay phone, but she didn't answer. This worried Mike because Kathy rarely left the house. He called several times but got no response. Worried about his wife, Mike called their neighbor, Tim Robinson, and asked him to check on her. Tim went to the house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. He looked through the living room window and saw that the television was still on. So he knocked again but got no response. At this point, he began to worry that something serious might have happened to Kathy. Instead of going home to call Mike or the police, he decided to drive around town looking for police patrols. After a few minutes of searching, he spotted a police car and explained the situation. He asked them to check on Kathy to see if she was okay. When the police arrived at the house, they also got no response to their knocking. They decided to try the door and found it unlocked. Once inside, the police found Kathy's older daughter lying unconscious on the sofa, clearly traumatized but still alive. The police quickly called an ambulance and continued to check other rooms in the house. In the bedroom, they found the younger child lying in her crib, safe and sound. But when they entered another room, they discovered a horrific scene. Kathy was lying on the floor, covered in blood and naked. The police immediately determined that she was dead. Her arms were also tied with a light cord. Paramedics took Kathy's daughter to the hospital and began investigating the crime scene. Kathy's father arrived at the house, but the police did not reveal any specific details. Instead, they asked him to go to the hospital to care for his granddaughter when she woke up. While waiting at the hospital, he learned of his daughter's death from a news report on TV. When Mike arrived at the house, the police quickly discovered something strange. He arrived late and had blood-like stains on his shirt. The police asked him to hand over his clothes and answer questions. During this time, the police discovered some interesting signs. They found several blood stains in the bathroom, indicating that the attacker had tried to hide the evidence after the crime. This suggested that the attacker had been in the house for some time to clean up. Forensic experts also discovered some important clues. There were no signs of forced entry, and all the windows and doors except the front door were locked. This suggested that Kathy had invited the attacker into the house or that the attacker had a key. Police speculated that the attacker may have threatened to harm Kathy's children if she screamed or resisted. Therefore, Kathy may have complied with the attacker's demands, hoping to be spared, but was ultimately murdered. As doctors worked to save Kathy's daughter, they discovered that she had been brutally beaten, most likely with her bare hands. She spent several hours in critical condition at the hospital, and her chances of survival were still very low. After examining Kathy's body, medical experts determined that she had suffered severe injuries with 16 stab wounds, most of which were concentrated in the abdomen. They also discovered that she had been sexually assaulted and collected biological samples of the offender from the scene. However, at that time, DNA analysis methods were not widely used in forensic science. Therefore, experts were unable to extract DNA profiles from biological samples. They were only able to determine the killer's blood type, so the sample was sent to the lab for further analysis. The police had noticed suspicious stains on his shirt early in the investigation and had kept the clothes for examination. His behavior that evening was very suspicious. He had gone out with friends after work, but instead of going home when he couldn't reach his wife, he asked a neighbor to check on him. The police had seen similar cases before, where a husband killed his wife and created an alibi by going out with friends. He would then ask someone else to check on his wife to avoid being the first to discover the body and throwing the police off the trail. The police expanded their investigation to see if Mike might have planned the murder before meeting his friends. They also discovered that Mike had a criminal record. After graduating from high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover police officer. Mike was sentenced to 6 years in prison but only served 2 years before being paroled. He later married Kathy. Although Mike had a criminal record, the police needed more evidence to charge him. The police also began investigating Mike's neighbor, Tim, because of signs of suspicion. Tim drove around town looking for patrol officers instead of calling the police. The police checked Tim's car and found suspicious blood-like stains on the carpet. They sent these samples to the lab for analysis. Now investigators wondered if Mike and Tim might have worked together to commit the crime. After completing the report, the medical examiner came to an important conclusion. Kathy's time of death was around 1 p.m., before she was discovered around 6 p.m. The police expanded their investigation to determine the suspect's whereabouts around that time and to find out what they did after the murder. Mike and Tim both claimed to be at work at the time. So the police set out to see if their statements were accurate. 2 days after the murder, they received a call from the hospital saying Kathy's daughter had woken up. The police went to see her in the hope that she would provide important information about what had happened. However, they encountered a major obstacle. The 4-year-old girl's memory was almost completely erased. She only remembered a light-haired man entering the house, while Mike and Tim had dark hair. But the police did not rule them out as suspects. They believed that the severe trauma could have made her memory inaccurate. The police received a call from the lab with surprising information. Experts examined the evidence and found that the stain on Tim's car carpet was motor oil, and the stain on Mike's shirt was just paint, not evidence of a crime. In addition, many of Mike and Tim's co-workers also confirmed that they had been at work all day and did not leave until the evening. Thus, they had no opportunity to go to Kathy's house and commit the crime. The police requested a lie detector test and the results showed that neither of them were lying. There was no conclusive evidence. The police had to review the entire case and investigate other suspects who might be familiar to Kathy's family. Because the attacker could have easily entered Kathy's house. During the investigation, they had conversations with Kathy's relatives and friends to find out who they thought might have committed the crime. Many of them immediately named the same person, Greg. Greg was Kathy's brother-in-law, and her loved ones revealed that she often complained about his behavior. Specifically, according to Kathy, Greg openly flirted with her and repeatedly tried to convince her to have sex with him. Kathy also said that Greg often made inappropriate comments about her appearance, especially about her abdomen. And according to the evidence collected, we know that most of the injuries were on Kathy's abdomen. The police also knew that Greg had a history of illegal drug use and a criminal record. Therefore, the police began to suspect him and soon found some important clues. They found Greg's fingerprints matched one in Kathy's house, as well as a hair that matched his. However, it should be noted that Greg often visited Kathy's family, so it is possible that the fingerprints and hair were in the house before the murder occurred. Kathy's parents also believed that he was the one who killed their daughter. Kathy's mother specifically remembered one time when Greg visited Kathy's daughter at the hospital. When she saw Greg, she had a clear look of fear on her face. These observations suggested that she was afraid of him. However, when asked, she could not remember what happened on the day of the murder. After hearing all this information, the police summoned Greg for questioning. However, he denied any involvement in the murder and said that he was with a friend at the time. During the questioning, Greg asked to go to the parking lot because he was afraid of being fined for expired parking. However, he did not return to the police station. Greg's wife, Kathy's sister, said that on the day of the murder, Greg dropped her off at around 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m. This meant that Greg had a 4-hour window around the time of the murder, enough time for him to commit the crime. However, the police still did not find enough evidence to prove Greg's involvement in the murder. In a last-ditch effort to find more clues, the police decided to analyze a semen sample taken from Kathy's body. However, at that time, the technology only allowed for the blood type of the owner of the semen sample to be determined. In addition, the analysis of the samples collected from the case was too small to be tested. However, the police still decided to perform the test. The results showed that the blood type of the owner of the semen sample matched Greg's blood type, but this was not enough to conclude that he was guilty. As a result, the police were unable to arrest him. They continued to search for more evidence, but were unable to prove that Greg was involved in the case. Kathy's family believed that Greg was the killer. Kathy's sister Shelley still did not believe that her husband was involved in the case and continued to live with him. In the years that followed, the police continued to revisit the case, hoping to find any new clues. In 1998, 11 years after Kathy was murdered, they requested a DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, experts were only able to extract a partial DNA profile, which, when compared to Greg's DNA, showed that Greg was among the 2% of the population who could match the profile. He could not be arrested based on this result. The police again called Greg in for questioning, telling him that the semen from Kathy's body matched his DNA. Greg then changed his original statement, saying that Kathy had been romantically involved with him and that he had actually visited her on the day of the murder, but Greg insisted that she was still alive when he left. The police were suspicious of Greg's sudden change in story because suspects often change their stories when they hear about DNA evidence. In addition, Kathy had complained about Greg's flirtations, feeling uncomfortable around him. So it was unlikely that she would have had a secret relationship with him. But the police knew that they could not convict without a perfect DNA match. The local police reviewed the case and confirmed that a guilty verdict was almost impossible, and the case was put on hold again for many years. In 2002, the police reopened the case and asked for help from forensic scientist Catherine Long. At the time, Catherine was doing groundbreaking DNA research. She and her colleagues wanted to know if the offender's DNA might still be on Kathy's body after the strangulation, and if they could extract that DNA for analysis. To test this, Catherine and her team conducted a simulation experiment. They followed the steps the perpetrators took by briefly strangling each other, then taking samples from their hands and necks for analysis. The results showed that even in such a short interaction, there were still enough skin cells to extract and analyze DNA. The police began to focus on the available evidence when they were unable to re-examine her body. They decided to thoroughly examine all the items related to the case to see if the perpetrator had come into contact with them. They quickly noticed the string of lights that the killer had used to tie Kathy's hands, which the police gave to Catherine and her colleagues to examine. As they began their work, they noticed that the string had been stored in a paper bag. This was important because the paper bag allowed air to circulate, preventing moisture buildup and protecting the biological samples. Experts used cotton swabs to collect biological samples from the entire length of the rope. They paid special attention to areas on the rope that still had traces of Kathy's blood. After analysis, they discovered 2 DNA profiles. The first profile, belonging to the victim Kathy, the second profile completely matched Greg's DNA sample. The police finally had evidence that Greg was the one who tied Kathy's hands, and that he was the killer. 15 years after Kathy's death, the perpetrator was finally arrested. During questioning, Greg did not confess, insisting that he had a romantic relationship with Kathy. The police did not believe him. While awaiting trial, Greg was detained. A cellmate of Greg's contacted the police and said that Greg had confessed to him. According to the friend, Greg told them the details of the attack and murder. Greg said that one day, he had been using illegal drugs and went to Kathy's house. Once inside, Greg tried to force Kathy to have sex, but she refused and asked him to leave. However, Greg became aggressive and attacked Kathy's daughter, causing many serious injuries. Greg assured Kathy that if she did not comply with his wishes, he would kill her. Kathy had no choice but to agree to protect her children. Greg then tied her up, attacked her, and killed her with many injuries. To cover up the crime, Greg washed the blood off himself in the bathroom and changed into Kathy's husband's clothes before leaving the school. The police forced Greg to face the truth. This time, Greg confessed to killing Kathy. In 2004, he pleaded guilty in court and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. However, he only served 4 years before dying at the age of 56 of liver cancer. Kathy's husband, Mike, died at the age of 45. For 15 years, Kathy's family, including her parents and children, waited patiently, trusting that the police would find the killer. Although they believed Greg was the killer, they saw him continue to live with their second daughter, but there was nothing they could do. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again. Hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father was in the military, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana met Kevin Green. When Diana was harassed by several men at a bar, Kevin intervened and chased the men away. In gratitude, Diana bought Kevin a drink. They went on a date a few days later, and their relationship quickly progressed. Kevin was in the process of divorcing his first wife. Kevin and Diana moved in together for a while, and Diana became pregnant. After Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married. While waiting for their daughter to be born, they rented an apartment in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana stayed home to prepare for the baby's arrival, having previously worked with her mother in a garment factory. By late September 1979, Diana was nearly 9 months pregnant. On the evening of September 30th, Kevin and Diana got into an argument after watching a movie together. The impending birth of their daughter had put a strain on their relationship. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby restaurant. About 40 minutes after the incident, Kevin called the local police department to report that his wife, Diana, had been shot and needed immediate medical attention. Police arrived on the scene shortly after receiving the call. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed, covered in blood, with a head wound that appeared to be a gunshot wound. However, upon closer examination, paramedics later determined that the wound was actually caused by blunt force trauma. When the police checked on Diana, found her alive and provided first aid until the ambulance arrived, they asked Kevin to leave the room. After the paramedics took over, they carefully transported Diana to the hospital. Meanwhile, the police asked Kevin to stay behind to give a statement. He told police that he and his wife had been arguing, so he decided to leave the apartment to calm down and buy some burgers at a fast food restaurant. In his haste, he realized he had left his keys inside, but chose not to go back to get them. Instead, he locked the door and went to his car. As Kevin drove away from the apartment complex, he noticed a truck with its back door open, and an African-American man walking back and forth toward the truck. It was late, around 2 a.m. He drove to the fast food restaurant he frequented, but it was busy, so he went to another location a few miles away. After buying a burger, he drove home, which took 40 minutes. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. He rushed inside and found his wife, Diana, covered in blood. He immediately called the police. Kevin's story had some suspicious signs, but when the police checked the fast food bag, they found the food was still warm and the receipt confirmed the time and place of purchase, supporting Kevin's story. As a result, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but not before asking him to provide a blood sample for further investigation. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts could still compare the blood found at the crime scene with Kevin's blood type. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors determined that her head wound was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it was likely inflicted by a small, heavy object. Unfortunately, Diana fell into a coma. The medical team worked diligently for several hours to save both her and her unborn child. After many hours of intense care, they were able to stabilize Diana's condition, but she still required surgery. During the investigation, police asked medical experts to determine whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The experts confirmed that Diana had indeed been sexually assaulted, finding semen on her body. However, Kevin testified that he and Diana had had sex just hours before the argument. Diana and Kevin's family stayed in the hospital all night. And the next morning, the baby's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. Doctors tried, but the baby did not survive. Although Diana remained in a coma, her chances of survival had improved. However, doctors warned that she could suffer long-term effects. Although Kevin had an alibi, police were not quick to clear him due to several inconsistencies in his story. He had an argument with Diana just hours before the attack, left his front door unlocked, and spent much of the time on a quick trip to a fast food restaurant. His claim of seeing a suspicious person near his home at night also raised suspicions. However, there was no concrete evidence linking Kevin to the crime. Police are investigating another suspect in a series of similar crimes in the area. A year earlier, a series of break-ins and assaults had occurred in Tustin and surrounding areas with similar modus operandi. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was killed after being beaten with a piece of wood and sexually assaulted. 4 months later, a 21-year-old woman was murdered and sexually assaulted. In July 1979, a woman was attacked in her apartment but survived, although she was in a coma for several weeks. Her testimony provided no new leads. Prior to Diana's attack, a similar attack occurred in September 1979, when a 34-year-old woman was murdered. A series of crimes occurred, all with striking similarities to the attack on Diana. The police believed they were dealing with a serial killer and focused their efforts on capturing him. To address the growing concern, the police decided to issue a public warning through the media, specifically targeting women living alone and those living in low-rise apartments, who appeared to be the serial killer's favorite targets. The warning caused panic, and in response, the police increased night patrols in the area. The police began by interviewing and soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was somewhat vague, the police were able to identify several men who matched and investigate them. Unfortunately, these leads did not lead to any cases. A week after Diana was attacked, her doctors informed her loved ones that she had finally regained consciousness. However, there was a serious concern: Diana was unable to speak or remember anything. According to her doctors, her brain was still recovering. Around the same time, another attack occurred in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, striking her multiple times with a piece of wood and sexually assaulting her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police were once again unable to catch the perpetrator. Diana spent several days in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. During this time, her mind slowly cleared, but she had lost almost all of her memory. Doctors told her family that her memories might return, but warned them not to remind her of anything, letting her remember on her own. After being stabilized, Diana was discharged from the hospital and her family took her home. Her husband Kevin had to work at the military base, so Diana was sent to live with Diana's parents. 2 weeks later, another attack occurred in the city, similar to the one on Diana. This time, the attacker killed a 17-year-old girl. Diana began attending physical therapy sessions and her condition gradually improved. Although she still could not speak or remember the attack, a breakthrough occurred 6 weeks later during a therapy session. The doctor asked Diana if she could remember who attacked her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly pointed to her wedding ring. The doctor shared this information with Diana's mother when she came to pick her up. Diana's mother asked her daughter if her husband, Kevin, was the one who attacked her, and Diana nodded. Diana's mother immediately took her to the police station to speak with the chief. After asking Diana a few more questions, the police confirmed that she remembered her attacker and identified him as her husband, Kevin. This new information dramatically changed the course of the investigation. Police suspected that Diana's attack was related to a series of similar incidents in the area, committed by a serial offender. However, Kevin matched the suspect's description, leading police to question whether Kevin could be the culprit behind these attacks. The police asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana had not recovered her memory and to return home with Kevin. But they agreed to do so. Meanwhile, the police kept a close watch on Kevin, monitoring his every move in the hope of finding evidence of a crime linked to the serial murders. Crime scene testing revealed evidence under Diana's fingernails, where they found bloody skin particles, in addition to the attacker's semen. After analyzing the evidence, police found a match between the attacker's blood type and Kevin's blood sample, indicating that Kevin was the one who attacked Diana. As for a motive, police suspect that Diana's refusal to have sex with Kevin may have prompted the attack. Although Kevin insists that they had sex earlier that night. The police spoke to Diana, and she remembered the attack clearly, confirming that Kevin was her killer. During the conversation, her mother expressed that they could no longer live with Kevin, and the police decided to arrest him. To protect Diana's family, Kevin was arrested at a store instead of at their home. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence. Preparations for the trial lasted 10 months, during which time Diana's health gradually improved. She regained her ability to speak. Diana was cleared of the charges, and her husband was found guilty of assaulting her. Kevin's defense team tried to use his fast food alibi, but it was not enough to disprove Diana's testimony. As a result, Kevin was convicted in November 1980 of the child's murder and assault on Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Police learned that 2 similar crimes had occurred in their district before Kevin was arrested, but both victims survived. Although the identity of the attacker remains unknown, these incidents raised suspicions that Kevin was involved in other crimes. The attacks stopped abruptly after Kevin was arrested. After Kevin's sentencing, Diana promptly filed for divorce, which Kevin did not contest. Diana then focused on her recovery. When Kevin became eligible for parole, the committee denied his request, a decision that was repeated 3 more times. The serial killer case remained unsolved until 1996, when police reopened the investigation. Semen samples from the victims, which had been stored in a laboratory, were retested. Police wanted to determine who the culprit was, and DNA analysis yielded a surprising result. Gerald Parker, a man arrested the same year as Kevin, was found to have a DNA match to the serial murders. After the DNA match confirmed Parker's involvement in the serial murders, investigators re-examined the attack on Diana. Parker and Kevin worked together on a military base, and Parker owned a dark-colored van, similar to the one described in the attacks. During his initial police interview, Kevin reported seeing an African-American man near a dark-colored truck in front of their home on the day of the attack. This information led police to consider the possibility that Parker was involved in the attack on Diana. While Kevin was in jail, the local prosecutor updated him on the progress of the bedroom basher serial murder investigation. The prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a DNA sample, which he quickly agreed to. While the DNA analysis was underway, police visited Parker in prison to discuss the case. Although they had not yet formally charged him with the attacks, they hoped to gather more information. Parker initially denied any involvement in the crimes, so detectives focused their questioning on the attack on Diana. During questioning, Parker revealed that on the night of the incident, he drove his truck to Kevin's house, intending to circle the neighborhood, looking through the ground floor windows for a victim. However, this time, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when Kevin left the house, Parker noticed that the door was unlocked, so he waited a few minutes before entering the apartment and attacking Diana. Parker revealed that he did not know Kevin's wife because they worked in different areas of the military base. He also confessed to committing 6 murders and 3 non-fatal attacks. After Parker's confessions, DNA evidence confirmed his guilt and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor quickly moved to overturn Kevin's sentence, and he was released from prison after 16 years. The case has caused widespread outrage, not only because an innocent man spent nearly half his life in prison, but also because it took so long for police to identify the real killer. When Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in compensation, a relatively small amount. Years later, he received an additional $100 for each day he spent in prison, totaling $620,000. Despite Kevin's exoneration, His wife Diana initially refused to believe he was innocent. She had previously claimed that Kevin was her only attacker. However, after DNA evidence from her body matched Parker's, she changed her story. Diana reported that Kevin attacked her before leaving the apartment, and then Parker entered and attacked her as well. However, Parker said that when he entered the house, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress. He also admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family proposed an alternative theory, suggesting that Kevin might have conspired with Parker to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house that night, leaving the door open. However, Parker denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was large and many people didn't know each other personally. Parker denied knowing Kevin. Kevin also denied any involvement with Parker, insisting that he would never harm Diana or their unborn daughter. He explained that he left the door open because he didn't want to go back to get the keys after their argument. And he still blames himself for that decision. As for Parker, he was sentenced to death in 1999, but this sentence has yet to be carried out. After years of waiting on death row, California imposed a moratorium on executions, and as a result, Parker remains incarcerated to this day. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat, the case of John Thomas McGuire. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were two sisters who lived in an orphanage. Living in an orphanage can be extremely challenging. You don't have a place of your own or time to yourself, and if you're unable to stand up for yourself, you're at risk of being bullied by kids who have been there longer. Typically, bullies target children who are loners. Sisters Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were luckier than most because they can always protect each other. They feel comfortable being around each other and don't try to make friends with anyone. Unfortunately for Anna Marie and Anna Marie, their family secret is about to be revealed. Their father, Larry, has been convicted and imprisoned, and this news has been widely broadcast on television by various news sources. One day, the McClure sisters, Amanda and Anna Marie, helped a new girl named Meredith who was being bullied. Meredith had been living with her mother, who was addicted to drugs. After her mother's death from an overdose, Meredith was too afraid to call for help and stayed with her mother's body for a few days. It wasn't until a friend visited and found her mother's body that emergency services were called. Meredith soon became friends with the McClure sisters, and the three of them had a lot of fun together. Amanda and Anna Marie never told anyone why they were living in an orphanage. And when Meredith asked, Anna Marie made up a story about their father being a police officer who died while on duty to catch a dangerous criminal. Meredith was so impressed with Anna Marie's story that she told it to the other children at the camp. Overnight, the McClure sisters became heroes and were admired by everyone. Most of the kids in the shelter had parents who had died from substance abuse or were in prison, so the McClure sisters' story made them stand out in a positive way. The sisters' secluded life at the orphanage came to an end when all the children wanted to befriend them. However, this marked the beginning of a difficult period in their lives. A heartbreaking truth comes to light: their father, presumed dead, is actually alive and serving a prison sentence for violence and sex crimes he committed against minors. The sisters' lives became a nightmare. However, they got a second chance when two different families decided to adopt them. This meant they would be living apart, and their bond was eventually broken. Amanda, who had previously worried her adoptive parents. They were worried that she would be single forever, and that not having a biological family had a profound effect on her mental health. Amanda's adoptive parents were relieved to learn that she was in a serious relationship with a man named John Thomas McGuire, who was 38 years old. This would be his second marriage, and he had 2 sons from a previous marriage. What reassured them even more was that John seemed to be a perfect partner and always supported her. He also had a friendly relationship with his ex-wife, which was a good sign for Amanda's future with him. After serving his sentence, Larry McClure was pardoned and settled in Virginia. His first priority was to find his daughters. He went straight to Amanda's foster parents, Glenn and Alex, said hello and introduced himself. He asked to see Amanda and requested her contact information, including her address and phone number. Although Larry appeared disheveled and intimidating, with deep wrinkles and dark circles under his eyes, he didn't seem intoxicated. However, his behavior was not quite right. Glenn, Amanda's foster parent, refused Larry's request but promised to inform Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry was taken aback by the term biological father, but he thanked Glenn and left. Glenn did keep his promise. He told Amanda that her father was free and was looking for her. Amanda was torn, with a part of her wanting to reject her father, given his past mistakes, and another part wanting to give him another chance. Amanda reaches out to her father, Larry, after many years of separation. Amanda initiates the conversation by calling her father, who is overjoyed to hear from her. Larry asks about her well-being, and she shares that she's doing well, married, and happy. Larry was very happy for his daughter and invited her and her husband to have dinner with him. Amanda is initially uncertain about meeting her father, but he senses her hesitation and reassures her by telling her to forget the old grudges, and he has lived all these years with only one thought: to see her and Marie. This suggests that Larry has been thinking about his daughters and wants to see them again. Larry's meetings with Amanda and John led to their introduction to the world of illegal substances, which he manufactured himself in his camper. Initially, their financial situation was stable, but Larry manipulated them into funding his substance production. As their addiction deepened, they both lost their jobs. Larry persuaded John to register as a drug addict to receive $180 in state assistance. However, this amount was insufficient to support their habit, and Larry continued to exploit them for money. Meanwhile, Larry met Anna Marie and repeated the same pattern, getting her hooked on substances and taking her money. Amanda and John's situation spiraled out of control. They accumulated huge debts, lost their house, and were forced to move into Larry's camper. John's parents, who were unaware of the situation, were told that they was going on a trip together. In reality, Amanda and John had become entrenched in a cycle of substance abuse and alcohol consumption with Larry, and John's parents have never heard from their son since. On Valentine's Day, John, still reeling from the effects of substance abuse, planned a romantic evening for his wife Amanda at the family circle. He cooked a fancy dinner, inviting Larry and Anna Marie to join them. However, under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a disturbing situation unfolded. Amanda and Larry, who were supposed to be father and daughter, began to develop an inappropriately close relationship. Sadly, John was unaware of this, and as a result, he became redundant in their twisted relationship. During the meal, John spoke very many warm words to Amanda, which made Larry extremely anxious. As the tension increased, Larry interrupted John's speech and asked if he could be completely honest with his wife. John agreed, and Larry suggested a game. They tied John's legs and instructed him to answer truthfully about his life. Initially, the questions covering topics like childhood and school. However, under the influence of drugs, Larry began to accuse John of being an undercover FBI agent. When John denied this, they hit him. Although John begging for mercy, but he was ultimately struck on the head with a bottle of wine, the same wine he had brought for the family dinner. Over the course of 2 days, Larry, Amanda, and Anna Marie subjected John to torture while using illegal substances. When they thought it was time to end things, Amanda put a black bag over John's head and tightened it around his neck until he stopped breathing. They buried John in the backyard and then celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, with more drugs and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their mental health worsened. They began to hallucinate, seeing John's ghost, hearing police sirens, and imagining that the ground where they buried John was disturbed as if he might escape and report everything to the authorities. The situation was chaotic, but the father and daughters still decided to take more drastic action. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and examined his pupils' reaction to light, even though he showed clear signs of decomposition. This, however, did not convince them that he was truly gone. In a frantic bid to prevent John from coming back to life, they dismembered his body with a wood axe and drove aspen stakes into each piece. They then buried the remains in different locations and covered them with lime to accelerate the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda got married. To conceal their relationship, Larry changed his name. The new family aimed to start afresh, moving to Kentucky. They promised each other to stop using illegal substances for good. To avoid suspicion, they even hung an American flag over their front door, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents were becoming increasingly concerned about his lack of contact. In 2019, John's mother even filed a police report regarding his disappearance. Meanwhile, Larry failed to inform the police about his move to another state, which violated his probation terms and led to his return to prison. Larry's mental state deteriorated, especially after long-term substance abuse and alcohol use. This sent him into rehab, leading to anxiety and confusion between what was real and what wasn't, reflected in his disturbing behavior. Larry suspected that the parole violation was merely a pretext for authorities to search his backyard for John's remains. He felt an urgent need to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and instruct them to dig up the body parts and rebury them far from their home. Since all prisoner calls are monitored, he had to find a discreet way to communicate this information. Larry meticulously prepared a speech to convey his message, but ultimately, he was denied the opportunity to make calls. Unable to cope with the situation any longer, he decided to confess to the police. Larry thought that if he confessed to the murder before being charged, he might avoid the death penalty. He even considered blaming his daughters to make his situation better. However, the police officer did not believe him. First of all, what murder? What body parts were buried in the backyard? What crazy idea did this man have? Legally, they had to verify his claims. Initially, the police planned to conduct an investigation. They took his statement, and they found out that John was indeed missing. A police unit was sent to Larry's house. First on the scene, investigators found evidence that Larry had mentioned, confirming all of the criminal's statements. The McClure sisters were quickly apprehended. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock, unable to believe that their father and stepfather could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more stunned to learn that Larry was trying to portray himself as an innocent bystander, claiming in his testimony that it was his daughters who killed John, and he was just unwittingly involved in the crime. As the investigation unfolded, each the family McClure member sought to protect themselves and convinced the police that their involvement was purely accidental. This situation was particularly difficult for John's relatives because there was no body, only remains were found. Those remains had to be carefully collected by forensic experts, transported to his parents, and ultimately buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many that John was a kind person. Despite the challenges they faced, his parents were able to arrange for his burial. Some friends contributed financially, while others assisted with transportation and funeral planning. John was laid to rest at a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, a member of the McClure family posted on Facebook, claiming it was a message from John. The post stated that he was going on a long trip and would be out of touch, asking friends not to worry about his absence. This raised suspicions that the family McClure had planned to kill John, and they wanted to deceive others to avoid causing panic. Despite the severity of the crime, but during the trial, Larry and Amanda received an additional 6 months in their sentence due to their illegal father-daughter marriage, which is prohibited in the state. The trial began, and Larry testified. He revealed that he had always felt remorse for his children throughout his life. He explained that when they were very young, he committed a serious crime that led to them being placed in an orphanage. Their birth mother had abandoned them, and he was the only one left feeling heartbroken. Larry expressed deep gratitude towards the families who adopted his children, mentioning that he had even prayed for their adoptive parents in churches. He desperately wanted to make up for the years gone by with them and admitted that this might be why he made the choices he did. He describes John as a wonderful young man and expresses his grief for him. He says that if he could change the past, he would, but emphasizes that no one can bring the dead back to life. He mentions his deep love for his daughter Amanda. However, he notes that Amanda does not care about John, her only concern is taking money from his account. He questions whether anyone would consider killing someone for $180, and that people should recognize Amanda for what she was. He called her a monster, not a human. He stated that he, Amanda and Marie, were addicted to drugs and that they deserved to be punished for their actions. He expressed his desire to speak to the jury and said that regardless of his sentence, he was aware of his health problems and believed that he might not live more than 10 years. He expressed regret for John's passing and again apologized to all of John's loved ones. The trial dragged on because the defendants kept changing their statements about whether they killed John or not. Amanda, unable to bear the long trial, made a deal with investigators. In return, she was assured that she would be charged with involuntary manslaughter at her next trial. Larry then gave another speech. He said, "The four of us bought the ingredients to make illegal drugs. Amanda came to me and shared her wish to get revenge on John. The reality is that John, while high on drugs, assaulted Anna Marie, which led to her becoming pregnant. For me, I needed to regain my daughter's trust after years apart. I felt I could not refuse their demands. I often blamed myself for what had happened and thought about ending my life. But I wondered, why should I suffer when this crime was committed by them?" After Larry's speech, it was John's family's turn to speak. John's mother cried uncontrollably and could not express her emotions. She expressed, "Even if one day I can forgive the McClure family, I will never forget what they did. I also hope I live long enough to see one of them die before me." Next, John's children spoke, cursing the killers and declaring that they would never forgive them. The judge delivered the final verdict, sentencing Larry McClure to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence for Amanda was revealed, her adoptive parents regretted telling her that her biological father was looking for her. They had always raised her with the freedom to make her own choices, unaware that this freedom could lead to such dire consequences. At the time the verdict was announced, Amanda stated that her father's jealousy was the root cause of the situation. Her adoptive parents pleaded with the judge to consider that Amanda's involvement in the crime was heavily influenced by Larry's negative impact, asserting that she would never have committed such a violent act otherwise. However, the prosecutors argued that the murder was a planned act, suggesting that Amanda and Larry were conspiring to be together as a couple. The initial hearing focused on Amanda, who was sentenced to 40 years. The judge said Amanda could serve only 20 years. During Anna Marie's sentencing, she attempted to speak out against John's murder. However, she felt pressured by her father and sister to do what they wanted, and she only attended Larry and Amanda's wedding out of concern for her own future. Ultimately, Anna Marie was sentenced to 40 years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano was born on November 30th, 1997, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to parents Eggy Diro and Tony Mano, and grew up with her older brother Alessandro. Although her parents separated when she was young, her father remained involved in her life, providing financial support and maintaining a relationship with his children. Celeste was a sociable and active student who enjoyed sports, dance. Initially, she wanted to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. However, she later lost interest in law and switched to studying advertising and marketing. In 2018, she landed a job at a rapidly growing e-commerce company. She rapidly advanced in her career, rising from a call center worker to the head of a department in just a few years. She was considered one of the company's most promising employees. Celeste has always been the center of attention, especially among men. However, she is very picky about her partners. Meanwhile, one of her colleagues, Louis Seiko, has had his eye on her since she started working at the company. He is almost 16 years older than her and has shown no signs of career ambition, remaining in the same subordinate position for many years. Despite his reserved nature, Louis Seiko was friendly and polite. He often asked Celeste out, but she consistently declined. Instead of taking the hint, Louis Seiko chose to view her rejections as a challenge or a game. He believed that Celeste was playing hard to get and was determined to win her over. Despite her clear lack of interest, Louis Seiko continued to try and draw her attention through various means. Celeste finds Louis Seiko's attention annoying, but she tries to keep her cool, hoping that he will eventually lose interest or focus on someone else. However, Louis Seiko's infatuation with Celeste grows stronger over time, becoming an obsession that everyone around him notices. Celeste confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never consider a romantic relationship with Louis Seiko due to several reasons. Firstly, she found him odd and unpredictable. Secondly, she was not attracted to men lacking ambition and life goals. Lastly, their significant age difference was also a factor. Despite feeling pity for Louis Seiko, she knew he had no chance with her. Louis Seiko's relentless pursuit of Celeste led to a critical mistake: he neglected his work duties. As a result, his productivity plummeted, which did not go unnoticed by senior management. Louis Seiko received 3 reprimands and warnings before being dismissed in early autumn 2019. As he gathered his belongings in the office, he appeared on the verge of tears, clearly devastated by the outcome. Celeste is relieved when Louis Seiko finally leaves her alone, but she also feels guilty, thinking that her actions contributed to his firing. Manuel, as a department manager, thanked Louis Seiko for his years of service and escorted Louis Seiko out of the building. As they parted, he patted Louis Seiko on the back and sincerely wished him luck. The dismissed employee, Louis Seiko, came to a surprising realization. He thought Celeste was hesitant to pursue an office romance because she was his superior, and it might harm her career. Now, Louis Seiko believed that there were no obstacles to their happiness, and they could be together. Overcome with emotion, Louis Seiko suddenly kissed Celeste on the cheek. Shocked by his bold move, Celeste was speechless. She quickly turned around and fled back into the office without saying a word. Louis Seiko misinterpreted her reaction, thinking that Celeste had feelings for him and that he shouldn't give up on pursuing her. After being fired, Louis Seiko created a social media account and sent Celeste a friend request, which she initially accepted. However, when he began asking her to meet up and go out, she politely declined and eventually blocked him. Undeterred, Louis Seiko created a new profile and sent her another friend request the next day. Celeste tried to ignore him, but he continued to comment on her photos, complimenting her appearance and suggesting they would make a great couple. To limit Louis Seiko contact, Celeste adjusted her profile settings to restrict messages, comments, and posts to only her friends. Despite this, a week later, she started receiving romantic messages from an unknown number, which she suspected were from Louis Seiko. The messages included poems he had written, admiring her beauty and trying to persuade her to go out with him. This was particularly concerning since Louis Seiko had never had her personal phone number during their time working together, and she had only communicated with him through work channels. Celeste initially tried to address the stalker by answering one of his calls. Celeste explained to him that there was no possibility of a relationship and urged him to stop contacting her. Unfortunately, Louis Seiko was not receptive to her message and instead continued to focus on how much he enjoyed hearing her voice. Despite Celeste's attempts to block him, Louis Seiko managed to circumvent this by calling from different numbers each time. Feeling harassed, Celeste eventually changed her phone number, but to her surprise, Louis Seiko was able to obtain her new number within a week. Celeste had been trying to protect herself from Louis Seiko, a crazed fan, for about 6 months. Despite blocking Louis Seiko's phone number and fake social media accounts, and ignoring his messages, the harassment continued. The messages escalated from romantic to bold and threatening, followed by demands to meet Celeste. Celeste had no idea that Louis Seiko had begun following her from work to her home, knowing her address. At first, she caught glimpses of Louis Seiko near her home, but Celeste assumed it was because she was too nervous. However, when she realized that Louis Seiko was actually following her, she knew she needed help. Celeste decided to seek police protection, hoping to obtain a restraining order that would prohibit the stalker from approaching her or her home. The police officers were unresponsive to Celeste's concerns, seeming to mock her request for help. They claimed that Louis Seiko had not done anything illegal, as writing explicit poems or fantasies in text messages is not against the law. Without evidence of Louis Seiko following or lurking near her home, Celeste was told to leave the police station. Celeste continued to be harassed by Louis Seiko on a regular basis. During the day, she would see his car parked across the street from her office, and at night, he would drive past her house several times. This constant presence made her feel uneasy. In August 2020, Celeste returned to the police station, this time providing photo and video evidence on her phone that showed Louis Seiko was indeed stalking her. A different officer took her statement and was more serious about the situation, expressing surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised Celeste to go to court immediately, where a restraining order was issued against Louis Seiko, prohibiting him from contacting or approaching her in any way. Louis Seiko's sudden disappearance brought Celeste a sense of relief and freedom. However, that feeling did not last long. Less than a month later, she began receiving text messages from unknown numbers. The messages were from Louis Seiko, who initially begged her to retract his statement and drop the restraining order, arguing that it was interfering with their romantic relationship. Over time, his tone shifted from pleading to demanding. Celeste immediately reported the messages to the police, as Louis Seiko's actions were a clear violation of the restraining order. As a result, he was fined and warned that further violations would lead to severe consequences, including the possibility of jail time, if he continued to harass her. After this incident, Louis Seiko remained silent for almost 2 months, leading Celeste to believe that he had finally left her alone. Celeste met Chris Reedsdale in September 2020, and they quickly discovered they shared many common interests. Life views and goals, which led to a romantic relationship. She confides in Chris about her harassment by Louis Seiko, who has been silent for over a month but still worries her. Chris made a conscious effort to make Celeste feel safe and supported, showering her with care and attention. A month later, in early November, Celeste decided it was time to introduce Chris to her family over dinner. Her family welcomed Chris warmly. The next few weeks passed peacefully, and Louis Seiko made no further attempts to contact Celeste. She was happy, spending all her free time with Chris, and it seemed that she had finally forgotten about worrying about Louis Seiko. On November 15, 2020, they went on a date to a cafe, where they sat together, enjoying each other's company. Celeste offered to take a selfie to capture the moment. Celeste loved the photo so much that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. By doing so, she also wanted to share the news of her new relationship and make it clear that things were getting serious. Chris also posted the photo on his page, along with a heartfelt caption expressing his love for Celeste. Sadly, this date turned out to be their last. After dropping Celeste off at home, Chris said goodbye, planning to see her again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen with her mother Eggy, before going to bed early to get ready for work the next morning. On November 16, 2020, Eggy was suddenly awakened around 4 a.m. by the sound of breaking glass. At first, she thought the noise was coming from outside, but then she heard more suspicious sounds, including banging, screams, and commotion, which seemed to be coming from within her house. Eggy quickly got out of bed, put on her robe, and rushed to her daughter Celeste's room. As she opened the door, she saw someone jumping away from Celeste's bed and escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was shocked to see her daughter lying in a pool of blood, covered in cuts and small shards of glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, her eyes wide open and looking up. Eggy immediately called an ambulance and tried to stem the bleeding from her daughter's deep wounds while she waited for help to arrive. Tragically, despite their best efforts, Celeste passed away before police and paramedics arrived. The medical examiners found over 20 stab wounds on the victim's body, with the fatal blow being a wound to her heart. After investigating the scene and comparing it to Eggy's testimony, the police concluded that the attacker broke into the Celeste's room through the window and carried out the attack in under 3 minutes, before the Celeste's mother entered the room. The attacker used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, and the Celeste tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if the Celeste had any enemies, Eggy mentioned Louis Seiko, who had been harassing the victim with calls and threatening messages for over a year. This information was confirmed by other family members, friends, and colleagues. The suspect left behind a large number of bloody fingerprints at the scene, as well as DNA on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, which was likely due to an injury to his hand. As a result, it was crucial to detain and interrogate Louis Seiko immediately, as he was the prime suspect in the case, and to verify and compare all the evidence and witness statements. Louis Seiko was immediately taken into custody but initially claimed to be innocent, professing his love for Celeste and insisting he could never hurt her. However, forensic analysis quickly proved him wrong. His bloody fingerprints were found both in Celeste's room and on the fence surrounding her property, tying him to the crime scene. Investigation revealed a prior restraining order, which prohibited Louis Seiko from approaching Celeste. Notably, the night before the crime, he bought a hammer and large knife at a local hardware store. The store's security cameras caught him purchasing the tools at checkout. It later emerged that he used these tools to carry out the violent crime, smashing through a window to enter Celeste's house and fatally stabbing her with the knife. The case against Louis Seiko was overwhelming, with evidence showing he had been watching his victim for a long time and knew everything about her. The final straw was when she posted a photo of her new boyfriend on social media. After that, Louis Seiko bought a knife and hammer and snuck into the victim's home at night to harm her. His actions seemed deliberate and planned. Louis Seiko's personal life was marked by instability. At 39, he had never married, still lived with his parents, had few friends, and had trouble holding down a job. He also had a family history of mental health issues, with a brother serving a long prison sentence for a serious crime. Louis Seiko's lawyer arguing that he needed specialized treatment rather than imprisonment. However, this claim outraged the victim's family, who feared that Louis Seiko would escape punishment. The psychiatric experts ultimately concluded that while Louis Seiko did have mental health issues, he was fully aware of his actions when he committed the crime. He had planned the details in advance, which meant he would have to stand trial. The murder trial is set for the fall of 2023, 3 years after Celeste's tragic death. In the years leading up to the trial, Louis Seiko attempted to argue that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. He spent much of that time in a psychiatric ward. During the trial, Louis Seiko remained calm and detached, seemingly uninterested in the proceedings. He admitted to his guilt but claimed that his intention was not to take Celeste's life, but rather to win her love. However, the jury unanimously found him guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving 30 years. The Celeste's parents drew attention to the fact that their daughter had reported the perpetrator to the police as early as 2020, seeking protection from him. However, her complaint was not accepted due to a loophole in the existing legislation. This led to calls for a change in the law, which would later be referred to as Celeste's Law. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kani Alm. Kani Alm was born on July 18, 1974, in Malaysia. She was the younger of 2 daughters and enjoyed a very close relationship with her parents. In 1995, Kani moved to the United States to pursue higher education and a career in information technology. While living in the United States, Kani met a man named Brandon. He was a U.S. citizen and an ethnic Chinese whose parents emigrated from Singapore over 20 years ago. Initially, Kani and Brandon were just friends, but their friendship eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. Brandon became a significant figure in Kani's life, supporting and helping her in various ways. They got married in 2001. Kani's life was on track in 2003. She was working as an analyst in San Diego, planning a future with her husband, and hoping to start a family. Her life changed dramatically that year. The trouble began when Kani's father, Ong Bai-yong, was diagnosed with cancer. Kani decided to fly to Malaysia to support her family during this difficult time. On June 1, 2003, Kani and her husband, Brandon, arrived in Malaysia. However, Brandon returned to the USA after a few days, leaving Kani to care for her father in Kuala Lumpur. Despite the distance, Kani and Brandon stayed close through daily phone calls. They would talk for hours, sharing stories about their daily lives, including their 2 pets. Kani's father underwent surgery to remove a kidney, but fortunately, his health began to recover. As he improved, Kani planned her return to the USA, scheduling a flight for June 14, 2003. Kani organized a farewell dinner at a local restaurant the evening before her departure, and she invited her mother, sister, and closest friends to join her. That evening, June 13, 2003, Kani and her mother arrived at the designated meeting spot later than the others. They had trouble finding a parking spot in front of the mall, so Kani parked in the underground lot. However, her mother was concerned about the poor lighting in the lot, rather than the parking fee. Once they arrived at the second-floor restaurant, Kani was excited to reunite with her childhood friends, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. They spent a few hours catching up, but Kani soon noticed that her mother, Pearlie, was starting to look tired. When Kani asked if her mother wanted to head home, Pearlie said she had a lot to do that day, but was okay with leaving early and promised her friends she would be back soon. Kani, her mother, and her sister Elsie got up from the table to pay for their parking. They went to the payment terminal, which was located on the first floor, a floor above the underground parking lot. As they waited in line for the terminal, Kani realized she had left the parking ticket in their car. She asked her sister and mother to stay in line while she went back down to retrieve the ticket. Elsie and Pearlie waited for 10 more minutes, but Kani still hadn't returned. Then, her sister started calling her. The first call went unanswered, and the second one was sent to voicemail. This was unusual, and Elsie and Pearlie immediately sensed that something was wrong. They quickly went to the parking lot, where they were shocked to find that Kenny's car was no longer there. They searched the parking lot several times to make sure, and after confirming that the car was indeed gone, they realized that Kenny must have disappeared along with it. Pearlie was certain that something had happened to her daughter, as Kenny would never leave without saying anything. Although the parking lot was poorly lit, it had surveillance cameras that might provide some clues about what had happened. The mall security initially refused to show Kenny's relatives the footage, but relented after her mother begged for their help. At midnight, Pearlie and Elsie sat in front of a monitor and watched the shocking footage, which confirmed their worst fears. The footage revealed Kenny's car speeding out of the underground parking lot, crashing through the barrier. Although the footage quality was poor, it was evident that a man was driving, with Kenny in the passenger seat. Her body was positioned as if she was trying to distance herself from the driver, leaning against the door. Upon seeing the footage, Pearlie immediately filed a disappearance and kidnapping report at a police station. The police launched an investigation, while Kenny's family and friends drove around Kuala Lumpur, desperately searching for her purple Proton tiara. Meanwhile, Brandon, Kenny's husband, began to feel a sense of unease. He tried calling his wife multiple times, but she didn't answer. He then contacted her mother, who informed him about the events that had transpired. The news of Kenny's disappearance left Brandon in shock. Pearlie could hear him sobbing over the phone. As dawn broke, Kenny's friends and family reluctantly returned home, their search efforts having yielded no results. The police disseminated information about the disappearance and conducted their own search, but unfortunately, it didn't lead to any breakthroughs. Even the footage from the mall's parking lot where Kenny was kidnapped failed to provide any leads on identifying the driver of the car. More than 72 hours have passed since Kenny's loved ones last saw her. Authorities believe that if she was kidnapped, it wasn't for ransom. If money was the motive, the kidnapper would have demanded it by now. A disturbing find was made by police when they discovered Kenny's car left empty on a city street. The front right tire was severely damaged, indicating it had been driven on while flat for some time, causing it to shred. In the back of the car, a large red stain was found on the passenger seat. Forensic experts collected evidence, including scrapings from the back seat, fingerprints from the steering wheel, and other parts of the car. There were many clues found in the vehicle. Kenny's family and friends held on to hope and prayed for her safe return. However, their hopes were crushed the next day after her car was found. On June 17th, a road worker detected a strong, foul smell coming from a manhole near the highway. Upon lifting the lid, he discovered a body that someone had attempted to burn using 2 car tires and sticks. A team of leading forensic experts from the Royal Malaysian Police immediately arrived at the scene. They found 2 car tires filled with concrete, which had been used as stands for road signs, lying on top of the body. It appeared that whoever had hidden the body, trying to make it harder to identify. Although the discovery of the body seemed to confirm the family's worst fears, Kenny's mother, Pearlie, refused to believe that her daughter was dead without official confirmation. "Until they confirm it, we will continue to hope that she will turn up alive," she said. The family went to the morgue, but the doctor said that they couldn't confirm the identity of the body yet. Kenny's family members provided DNA samples for comparative analysis. Unfortunately, the results confirmed their worst nightmare. The body was indeed that of their daughter, Kenny. Some sources claim that before the DNA test results, Kenny's family identified the jewelry on the body. However, as a loving mother, Pearlie held on to the hope that her daughter was still alive until the very end. The emotional torture she endured is unimaginable. The autopsy revealed that Kenny had 2 stab wounds to her abdomen, and a medical forensics expert found signs of strangulation. A cloth was tied around her neck in multiple knots, and semen was found inside her body, which served as a source of DNA. A few days after the body was discovered, an incident raised questions about the work of police. An undercover policeman, Subramaniam Ravichandran, reported to his superiors that on the night of Kani's disappearance, he was on duty with his partner, patrolling the streets of Kuala Lumpur at night on their motorcycles. Both officers were dressed in civilian clothes. They noticed a car parked incorrectly, taking up half the road, and stopped to investigate if anyone was inside. Ravichandran approached the driver's door and saw a man behind the wheel with a woman in the passenger seat. He knocked on the window, and when the man lowered it partially, Ravichandran displayed his police ID and asked what they were doing. The driver replied they were just chatting and not doing anything illegal. Ravichandran then requested to see their IDs. As the driver handed over the documents, she in the passenger seat made unusual hand gestures, seemingly asking for help, but stopped whenever her assumed boyfriend looked at her. Noticing this, Ravichandran asked the driver to step out of the car. However, the driver responded aggressively, claiming Ravichandran was not a police officer but a thief. He then raised the window and reached for the ignition. Realizing the car might drive off, Ravichandran drew his pistol and shot the right front wheel. Despite this, the car sped away. Ravichandran and his partner pursued on a motorcycle but were unable to catch up, which is puzzling given the car had a flat tire. At the time, the Malaysian Police Department was in a state of disarray, which might explain why the officer didn't call for backup or report the incident. The car with a flat tire was a purple Proton Tiara, driven by 27-year-old Ahmad Najib bin Aris, accompanied by a woman named Kani Om. Although the police chase did not result in an immediate arrest, the officers managed to obtain documents from the driver. Tragically, Kani Om was later found dead. It is possible that if the officer had acted differently during the encounter, the outcome might have been different. Unfortunately, Ravichandran only informed his superiors about the incident after Kani's body was discovered. The only positive outcome of that night was that the police had obtained documents that could help identify the suspect. Besides Kani's family, many Malaysians attended her farewell ceremony. Her death was a devastating loss for her husband, Brandon. Meanwhile, the police launched a search for Ahmad Najib. They discovered that he didn't live at the address listed in his documents, but his name was genuine, providing multiple leads to track him down. The police searched for Ahmad Najib's name in the Registry of Documented Marriages and the National Agency of Social Support. They found a match, revealing that Ahmad Najib bin Aris was born and raised in Muar, Malaysia. He was the second of 4 siblings and had dropped out of school to work and support his family. In 1998, he moved from Muar to Kuala Lumpur, where he got married and had 2 children. Since 2000, he had worked as a cabin cleaner for Malaysia Airlines. Knowing the name of Ahmad Najib's wife and her workplace, the police began surveillance. She worked at a metropolitan bank, and after her shift ended, undercover police officers followed her to determine her home address. Now that they knew where Ahmad Najib lived, the police had to ensure he was inside the house without alerting him. For 3 days, they monitored the house, but Ahmad Najib didn't appear. At one point, investigators doubted whether Ahmad Najib still lived with his family, but this was a hasty conclusion. On the 4th day of surveillance, at around 4 a.m., a cab pulled up to the house, and Ahmad Najib stepped out. Within a minute, he was handcuffed and taken to the police station for questioning. News of the arrest and the suspect's identity quickly reached the press. Many people who knew Ahmad Najib were shocked to learn that he was suspected of kidnapping and killing Kani Om. Those who knew him described Ahmad Najib as a devoted husband, a caring father of 2, and an overall good person. However, investigators soon discovered that he may have been hiding a darker side. During the initial interrogation, Ahmad Najib remained calm and requested to speak only with the head of the Criminal Investigation Division. It wasn't until he was presented with evidence linking him to Kani Om that Ahmad Najib began to deny any wrongdoing. His confidence seemed to wane as the evidence mounted. Investigators showed him 2 IDs that he had given to an officer on the night of Canny Ong's kidnapping. They also revealed that they had found bloodstains on his jacket and jeans, which DNA analysis would likely confirm to be Canny Ong's blood. After realizing the officers had solid evidence and were not bluffing, Ahmad Najib confessed to kidnapping and killing Canny Ong. Within 10 days of the kidnapping, on June 23, 2003, he was taken to court, where he repeated his confession. The police then conducted an investigative experiment where Ahmad Najib showed them all the locations he had been with Canny Ong. He provided a detailed account of how he forced her to be intimate with him multiple times, how he took her life, and how he attempted to dispose of her body. Evidence supporting his statements was found at all the locations he led the police to. The investigation began at the underground parking lot, where cameras captured footage of Ahmad Najib. According to his statement, he was waiting for his former boss, who had fired him and whom he sought revenge against. However, the claim about the former boss was never verified. Hiding in the darkness, he observed Canny Ong searching for something in her car and seized the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. He forcefully pushed her into the car, issuing threats that if she attempted to escape or seek help, she would face dire consequences. Overwhelmed, Canny Ong became disoriented and obediently followed his instructions. Next, he took the driver's seat and sped out of the parking lot. After crashing through a barrier, he stopped in an industrial area, where he began to harass Canny Ong. Just as this was happening, a plainclothes police officer approached the car. Ahmad Najib falsely told the officer that he didn't know he had taken the wrong person until the officer asked him and his victim for their identification. Even assuming Ahmad Najib had intended to kidnap his former boss, his guilt remains unchanged. Undoubtedly, his former boss would have suffered the same fate as Canny Ong. According to Ahmad Najib's account, he managed to evade the pursuing officer. Despite the officer possessing his documents, Ahmad Najib failed to consider releasing Canny Ong. Instead, he stopped the car on the street to replace a tire damaged by a bullet. Nearby, a car containing a woman was parked at the spot where he had pulled over. He approached she and asked for a car jack, intending to change his tire. However, he noticed Canny Ong signaling to she, who then handed him the jack. He abandoned the idea of changing the tire and drove off immediately. Later, he stopped at a secluded area and used a knife to threaten Canny Ong, forcing her to engage in intimate acts with him. Afterwards, he drove to another district where he coerced Canny Ong into satisfying him again, with both of them in the back seat. Canny Ong pleaded for mercy, but he took her life instead. He then disposed of her body in a manhole near a highway, moved the car to another location, and left it there. 16 hours later, he returned to the scene with a gasoline canister in an attempt to conceal evidence of the crime. DNA analysis confirmed that the semen found in Canny Ong's body belonged to Ahmad Najib bin Aris. His DNA was also discovered in the car, along with his fingerprints, providing further irrefutable proof of his guilt. Additionally, the analysis revealed that the blood on his jacket and jeans belonged to Canny Ong. The trial began on September 15, 2003, 3 months after Canny Ong's death. This high-profile case drew widespread attention from the Malaysian media and public. The trial attracted not only ordinary Malaysians and journalists but also individuals seeking to boost their reputation, including numerous attorneys representing Ahmad Najib. Despite admitting guilt during the investigation, overwhelming evidence, including DNA proof, Ahmad Najib changed his stance after consulting 6 attorneys. At his first trial, he claimed his confession was made under police pressure. However, the judge before whom Ahmad Najib confessed immediately after his arrest testified that there were no signs of physical abuse, and Ahmad Najib appeared calm and relaxed. The attorneys then shifted their strategy, arguing that Kenny Alm was in the car with Ahmad Najib voluntarily. They suggested that Kenny Alm, a black belt in Taekwondo, should have attempted to escape if she were being held against her will. However, this attempt to blame Kenny Alm was rejected, as people respond differently to critical situations. However, another claim surfaced, stating that Kenny Alm had consensual intimacy with Ahmad Najib and that Kenny Alm's death was caused by strangulation used to heighten the experience. Forensic experts disagreed with and rejected this account of what happened. The cloth around Kenny's neck was tied in multiple knots, suggesting that Kenny Alm had no intention of loosening it. Indeed, the cloth was so tight that the skin beneath was the only area on the body not affected by the fire. Furthermore, the cloth was a type used for cleaning plane windows, and given the defendant's job as a cabin cleaner, this linked him more closely to the crime. Additionally, the lawyers struggled to explain the stab wounds on Kenny's body. At this point, Ahmad Najib's attorneys advised him to remain silent and not testify. Many questioned why Kenny didn't escape the car when she had at least 2 chances to do so. On February 23, 2005, Ahmad Najib bin Aris was convicted of all charges connected to the crime committed against Kenny Alm. The evidence pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. Ahmad Najib received the maximum sentence under Malaysian law, 20 years imprisonment and 10 strokes of the cane for violating Kenny Alm's sexual integrity, plus the death penalty for causing her death. In Malaysia, the death penalty is carried out by hanging, a method that differs significantly from the lethal injection used in some other countries, such as the USA. Ahmad Najib's lawyers attempted to appeal the sentence twice but were unsuccessful both times. In 2010, Ahmad Najib petitioned the head of state to commute his death sentence to life imprisonment, maintaining his innocence. However, his plea for clemency was rejected. More than 13 years after Kenny Alm's death, on September 23, 2016, Ahmad Najib's sentence was carried out. He was 40 years old at the time of his execution. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002, when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month, in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent, and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Louis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14, the catamaran set sail from Varadero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Louis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Louis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Louis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Louis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Lewis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Lewis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Lewis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15th, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18th. The authorities were suspicious when Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request, as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Lewis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Lewis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Lewis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soul mate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Lewis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Lewis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Lewis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Lewis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Lewis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Lewis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Lewis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Lewis's belongings. It was discovered that Lewis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Lewis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Lewis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Lewis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Lewis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Lewis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Lewis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice, as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Lewis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Lewis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Lewis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Lewis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on the claim that Lewis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. It's sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the water line were left open. The damage to the dual hulls seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the water line. The water line is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Lewis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, a judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found, and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, "In January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Lewis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Lewis pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Lewis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Lewis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including man-overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy, for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being.